Hello, everyone, and thank you for listening to this episode of the Refold Podcast, where we talk about everything related to language learning. My name is Clayton, also known as George Pig, and I manage the community here at Refold. Today, our guest is Josh, TheSensinator. He's a recent graduate with a degree in linguistics and Arabic. All right. Hey, Josh.
Hi.
So, Josh, aka TheSensinator. It is a pleasure to be able to interview you today, to talk with you. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Talk about sort of your history with languages, your history with the language community.
Yeah, of course. So hi everyone. I'm Josh, aka TheSensinator. And my love for languages started, I'd say, when I was 12, and it was after I had learned that one of my great grandparents was Polish. So I was like, "Oh my God, I want to I want to connect with that. I want to learn Polish." So I started by just getting a free trial on Babbel, and I just studied Polish for a bit. It didn't really go anywhere, but that kind of just started a lifelong passion. I've kind of just been hopping from language to language since then. And yeah, so the primary languages that I've studied are probably Swahili and Arabic. I've dedicated by far the most time to those two. Um, each of which I've studied for a few years by now. Um, and yeah, pretty much just from the age of 12 to now, I've just been incredibly passionate about languages and just linguistics as well. So as a result of that, I've been studying linguistics and Arabic at university. I'm actually going to be graduating in like 5 days from now on the 8th. So that's kind of exciting.
You'll be graduating from your undergraduate.
I will, yes.
Very cool. So, yeah, you got interested in languages when you were 12, and you liked them so much that you eventually decided to get a degree in linguistics. All right. And your two main languages, quote unquote, are very interesting, Swahili and Arabic. And you even did a degree in Arabic. So, what's it like learning Swahili? That's a language that we don't see a lot in the sort of internet language spaces. There's a bit of like Eurocentrism with a little bit of like CJK, the Sinosphere languages.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say it's a very different experience from, I guess, more quote unquote mainstream languages, because for Swahili, I found that there are a ton of resources out there for it, but they're not really in the places where you would normally look for other languages, like maybe say Spanish or Chinese or Japanese. So it kind of took a bit to get into it. I didn't really know where to look and how to research more on it. So in my early days, I was even resorting to finding like grammars of the language, people that actually studied and written dissertations on the language. And I was actually reading through that and trying to get information. So it was difficult getting started, but then you'll find a YouTube channel that recommends a lot of other resources, and then those resources just lead to more and more. I found this one Reddit post that had 10 Swahili textbooks, the links to 10 of them, and they were all incredibly useful. So it was difficult starting out, but I don't know. There are a lot of resources. It's just it's interesting studying a less mainstream language because the resources aren't really as easily findable, but they are still out there. Um, and also another thing, it's kind of hard to find speakers to actually practice the language with. But yeah, I'd say that's the biggest handicap, because even with all of the extra resources that you can find, you don't really find a lot of Swahili speakers on the internet, at least not in my experience. So that's something that made it difficult. But I worked with my university to find someone, and then we met up twice per week, and then we just kind of talked in the language. So that was fun.
And yeah, with Swahili, surprisingly, there is a lot out there. It's just a matter of knowing where to look to get your foundations in the language.
Exactly, yeah.
I was very surprised when I visited a certain online library that they had over 200 books in Swahili.
Wow.
Which again, Swahili has a lot of speakers, but you just don't expect there to be PDFs and e-texts of the language. And how is it as far as like finding media in Swahili? Where you mentioned that you've watched a few movies in it. So people here at Refold, we generally take a very input-heavy approach. We're kind of inspired by Crash and his input hypothesis. So for us, the bread and butter is really like reading through books, reading comics, listening to movies.
Yeah. I'm also a big advocate for like a very input heavy approach to language learning. So I've always loved just like finding like songs and movies and stuff. It was surprisingly easy to find movies. Like I literally would just like look up sometimes like Swahili movies or movies in Swahili, and like the fifth or sixth option would normally like be some movie that really captures my interest, and I like just like make an evening out of it where I just like just watch the movie and like really like, I don't know, just try and like focus on following the plot and like understanding all of like the different aspects of like the plot and stuff. So for finding media in Swahili, I'd say very, very easy.
Very cool. And a lot of times you'll see in like developing countries, they put full movies on YouTube, sometimes even officially, and that can be neat.
Yeah.
When you were practicing Swahili, was your partner from Kenya or Tanzania or Comoros? Where about?
Yeah, so my partner was actually from Nairobi. So
Okay.
yeah, I got a lot of I guess exposure to like Kenyan culture, like as it is like around Nairobi. I learned a lot of very interesting things due to my partner being from there.
Cool. And unfortunately, you said that we talked a little bit a week or two ago, and you said that you put Swahili on the back burner for Arabic. So what happened there?
Yeah, just school mainly. I've been overloading my schedule every possible semester. And it's very difficult to study a language on top of, well, I felt very overwhelmed trying to juggle both. So I decided to just really focus in on Arabic for my degree. But now that I'm about to graduate, I'm probably going to start studying Swahili again. Try and mix them both.
Very cool. Well, if you've ever heard of Language Crush or Link, they're like assisted readers with like built-in dictionaries, um, and you can mark a word as like known or not. They both support Swahili now.
That's awesome. I love Link. I'm definitely going to use that.
Yeah, I'm a huge Link fan, and uh, I've heard Swahili calling now that Link supports it, and yeah, hopefully you get back into it. It's kind of neat to have some sub-Saharan uh, African representation.
Yeah, that's awesome. Especially since so few programs offer anything for pretty much Africa as a whole. So I don't know. It's awesome. I hope that as time goes on, we keep seeing more and more languages be like supported on like a larger scale, like with like learning resources and stuff.
For sure. So, what is it like doing a degree in Arabic?
Yeah, very intense, especially here. We had homework for every class from when I started my freshman year until I finished this semester. And the classrooms were all of my classes have been very heavy on like immersion in the language. So very rarely was like English like used. So it's always been a very intense and like all encompassing environment of Arabic. And I don't like a lot is expected out of you if you're studying Arabic here, but it like pays off because you're constantly being exposed to the language and being challenged to use it in different ways. Like we would have to like listen to like we would like have to like listen to like segments on like radio stations, and then we'd have to like talk about them. And we'd like have to like watch stuff, and we'd have to like read like newspaper articles and stuff. So very intense. And even overwhelming at times. But there's definitely a reason why, and it definitely pays off, I'd say.
And when you're doing a degree in Arabic, what do they teach you? Do they teach you MSA, it's Modern Standard Arabic? Do they teach you a spoken variety of Arabic? Do they teach both?
It's almost always MSA exclusive if you're talking about university level Swahili courses. Arabic courses. I don't know why I just said Swahili. It's almost always MSA, which is kind of difficult because that's not actually how anyone speaks in the Arab world or in North Africa. So it's kind of difficult, but that is the most broadly understood way of speaking Arabic, I guess. So I guess the ultimate goal is just kind of being understood across the Arab world and like being able to consume media and stuff. But yeah, very rarely is it dialects. Like we've watched like we've watched like shows and stuff that were in dialect, but everything that we had to write and everything that we had to read was pretty much entirely MSA.
And how about on your own time? Have you taken up a dialect, or do you mostly focus on MSA?
Most people will also focus on a dialect, but and I mean I wanted to study Moroccan Arabic, but I just didn't really have the time. And also I didn't really have a strong enough reason to study a specific dialect because my interest in the Arab world is just in the Arab world in general, not like one specific country. So I've tried like focusing in on specific dialects, but then I'm like, oh, but those other ones are calling to me. I don't want to leave them out like in the dark. So I get really overwhelmed by all of the possibilities, I guess, especially since I don't feel strongly about any of them over the others.
So when it comes to Arabic versus Swahili, um, you're comparing a Semitic language to a Bantu language. Which do you have the most fun with? I have to ask. Because, Arabic seems sort of like vaguely European. It's fusional. It's got two genders. 3 cases if you speak Modern Standard Arabic. Whereas Swahili is like agglutinative, does not really have case at all, has a whole bunch of different genders or noun classes. They're 2 very different languages. So what's the vibe of like learning each and speaking them?
Oh, they're both so fun, honestly. I have such a passion for both of them. One thing that normally I find grammar in languages to be really fun. I feel like I hear people constantly complaining about having to like learn like new like grammatical features within languages, but that's my favorite part, and especially in Swahili and in Arabic for different reasons. So first, I'll talk about Swahili a bit, and then I'll talk about Arabic. In Swahili, I love I love agglutinative languages because it's almost like you're playing with like Legos, and then you like piece the Legos together to like form like new like units of meaning. And especially in Swahili, which is highly consistent, it's very agglutinative. Like it is like the one of the examples of an agglutinative language. So like it's pretty much just like piecing things together, and like there are very rarely do those like individual parts like change to reflect like what's around them. So yeah, I really love I really love that aspect of Swahili. I also find the ridiculous amount of noun classes to be like really fascinating as well. Yeah, having 18 different like noun classes, like it seems overwhelming at first, but like there's something so beautiful about it because like in every sentence like there's just a certain like sing-songy nature to it, because like normally what the nouns begin with is what like a lot of other parts of the sentence will also begin with. like for example, if you have a noun in the key class, like kitabu for like book, then like the verb that's associated with that will also start with the key, and so on and so forth. So, and even the adjectives too. So like if you wanted to say like, let's say like, it's been a while since I've done Swahili, but like if you wanted to say like 5 books, or no, then it changed. But like,
It would be vitabu
yeah,
instead of
exactly,
vitabu.
vitabu. So it'd be like vitabu vitano. So like,
And that's really cool. I enjoy some of the nativization in Swahili where they re-bracket, they reanalyze words. So
yeah,
kitabu was borrowed from
from
Arabic,
Arabic. Yeah,
and it got analyzed as ki plus tabu. So now
yeah.
it changes. So plural would be vitabu. The same thing has also happened with some speakers with the word wire. I guess wire was borrowed as waya, and
Oh.
borrowed as a W class, and then the plural is sometimes nyaya. Like,
Oh, that's so
so,
fascinating. Wow.
yeah, I really enjoy that sort of nativization and rebracketing that happens across languages.
Me too. I've always found that kind of stuff so fascinating. And you see it like quite a I mean, even with Arabic loans in the English, this is kind of opening a can of worms for me because I'm really interested in this kind of stuff. But like, there are a lot of Arabic words that have been brought into English with their definite article attached. It's like, for
Mhm.
example, like algebra. Like Al is just a definite article, but like now we just picked the entire thing and took it all, and we're like, okay, this is it.
Mhm.
There's also a kind of funny case with French where they managed to reanalyze the word for unicorn 2 times in a row. um, it used to be like unicorne, like in like old French or whatever. And then they reanalyzed that as being like un icorne. So then it just like became like icorne as like the root, or like icon, like in like the more like modern like French, whatever. And then like and then it was very rarely said without the definite article. So it was like licon, like all the time. And now they've just analyzed the word as licon now. So that's just like how you say unicorn in French. That's another. Sorry, that was a tangent. I just love
No,
languages.
it's fine. I think rebracketing is cool. The usual English examples are like orange, um, apron, um, nickname,
Yeah.
where it used to be ick name. And then, like in Spanish, you've got naranja, right? So, an orange,
Yeah.
orange, and so on and so forth. Um, and I guess with Swahili and Arabic, for people who are not aware, they had hundreds of years of pretty intense contact. There are actually like a whole bunch of Arabic words in Swahili. So you mentioned kitab, right? Like book. But yeah, I imagine that like even though like we don't usually think of Swahili as necessarily being part of the sort of Muslim world, it really is. If you get to the coastal part of Kenya and Tanzania, Zanzibar. Um, so how was that? It's sort of like you got like the directions in Swahili seem to be straight out of Arabic, for example. Um, how was that? Do you find that your Arabic has sort of helped reinforce all of these loans in Swahili?
Oh, definitely, yeah. It was even the other way around at first because I studied Swahili first, and I could like use a lot of the Swahili loans and then like transfer them into Arabic, and like a solid like 30 to like 50% of the time, like I could like roughly guess like what a word would be in Arabic. It is really interesting how much they've been in contact with each other because, as you said, you wouldn't like really associate the two with each other as being like parts of the Muslim world, and like you wouldn't really expect Swahili to be in the sphere of influence of Arabic, but they really have been. They've had a very long history of being very closely like intertwined.
And to talk a little bit about Arabic, what are some things that you like about Arabic? So I imagine the classic would be the triconsonantal root system.
Yep. it's it's just so satisfying to work with roots in Arabic, because all you need to know is like a certain like pattern to put them into, and then you can make so many new words. Like it's just so fun to play with. Like, and even like with the different forms of verbs that you can put those roots into. It's just it's interesting. It's very, I guess I really enjoy languages that have very neat patterns. And I find that in both Swahili and Arabic quite a lot. But yeah, the triconsonantal roots are just really fun to play with. And I also just really like music from the Arab world, and that helps a lot too. So I can just like spend like an evening just relaxing and listening to like songs just from across the Arab world. So that's another thing. There's a lot of nice media in the language. Yeah.
So, moving on to a little bit about linguistics, what is it like to do an undergraduate degree in linguistics? So, a lot of people are vaguely interested in languages. Some people are interested in linguistics, but like usually what I've seen with sort of like popling is stuff like historical linguistics is interesting. People like to compare related languages, but like we're not looking at like syntax trees for fun. Most people aren't. So what is it like doing an undergraduate degree in linguistics?
Yeah, it's interesting because you would kind of assume that the same people that like learning languages would like linguistics, but it is quite different. And it can get a lot more intense with like linguistics. Linguistics is kind of more focused on the science behind languages and kind of being able to analyze like all of their little like intricacies and stuff. Like, for example, I could like find like a random phrase from a random language and its meaning, and then I could like find out like I could like make a ton of conclusions about that language just based on like that kind of stuff. So it's almost more sciencey than actually learning languages.
What are some of
And
the things that you learned in the process of doing an undergraduate degree in linguistics?
all kinds of stuff. Normally when you're getting an undergraduate degree that's just like a general like linguistics degree, it's very broad. I've taken introductory classes in, I'm pretty sure, every single like major subfield of linguistics. So for example, I've taken classes specifically on like phonetics. I've taken classes specifically on phonology. I've taken classes specifically on morphology, and just so on and so forth. I've taken like syntax classes. Just so it's honestly pretty much studying every level of language to like a pretty solid foundational level of every level of language. And then normally if you were to go for like a master's or a higher level degree, then you would like specialize a lot. So for me, it's been very, very general. Every year I'm learning different stuff about different areas in linguistics, I guess.
So, what was your favorite thing to study in your undergraduate degree?
There have been a few. First of all, I really love historical linguistics, so that's a big one. I also took a class my sophomore year called Languages of the World, which was entirely focusing on different parts of the world and looking at the linguistic diversity within them. And that's right up my alley as someone that hops from language to language in completely different parts of the planet. So that was fascinating. Also, this semester, I took a class on language. Well, it's called Language in the Mind. And it kind of like, its goal was kind of looking at like these like really like broad questions, like where does language come from in the human brain? And does language change how we view the world, like linguistic relativity and all that stuff? And just very broad, like kind of philosophical questions, like where would we be without human language, and what makes human language like unique from like other forms of communication? So I found that really fascinating because it's kind of really challenged like how I view language on like a fundamental level. Like it's kind of like really challenged me to like really like refine my definition of what language is. Cause like if you think about it, that's such a weird thing to define. Like it's such this like broad thing that like covers like so much, and like it's sort of just like narrowing on a specific definition. So I don't know. That's been really cool. Kind of just like thinking about the philosophy behind language.
For sure. Yeah, linguistics is a very cool field, but it's also very broad. You mentioned specializing, and sometimes people who go on to do higher degrees in linguistics specialize very heavily, to the point that like a layperson like me would not be able to really follow along.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, so, what are language fans missing out by not having a foundation in linguistics? Because I've been very surprised, well, sort of surprised. I like linguistics sort of as a hobby. I can read about morphology all day. I like to read about phonology. I like to read about, these things, go down Wikipedia rabbit holes, but I'm not an expert, and I don't claim to be. But a surprising amount of people in the language learning communities don't do this. They don't know the IPA. They don't know what a morpheme is, what a bound morpheme is. They don't know what lexical tone is. They just don't know these things. Then they don't need to. Like you can be quite good at your second language without knowing these things. But what are they missing out by not having sort of a foundational basis in the science of language?
Yeah, I think I think it just naturally gives you a head start in whatever language you're wanting to learn. It isn't a requirement per se, but I think that having tools such as knowing the IPA and knowing these like kind of grammatical terms that could apply to the language that you're learning, I think that just naturally like gives you like a bit of a boost, because if you know the IPA and you're trying to learn how to pronounce a language, like you've already got that, and you can just like look at what the sounds are in the IPA. And if you know the IPA, then you like know what all of like the rows and all of the columns like mean. So you can like, even if you've never made a sound in your life, you can at least like have an idea of how it's made. And um and just with grammatical topics, there's some topics like pretty much any like there are a lot of grammatical concepts that are very foreign to people that are learning other languages. And if they already have a basic idea of what that concept is, they could probably work with it a lot faster than someone who doesn't, I guess.
Yeah, people tend to not have a lot of meta-linguistic awareness. You know, um,
Yeah.
they don't know about other concepts like a lot of Western European languages are habere, right? They've got a word for to have. I have a dog, you have a dog. But a lot of languages don't. They do possession in other ways. Um, and like obligatory plurals is a very European thing, where some languages have optional plurals. Or some languages have singulatives. It's like the opposite of a plural, where they take a plural and they make it singular. And there's a lot of diversity out there, actually, that if you've never really, dabbled like we have or done a degree in linguistics, you won't know about that sort of general knowledge. When it comes to that, by the way, what are some cool features that you've seen across these world languages doing your degree, learning about things, phonology, morphology?
Oh man, I could go on so long.
It's okay. We have half an hour left. No worries.
um, One that pops into my head from super recent. I just learned about this language. I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation of it, but it's called Quickstart or something like that, and it's spoken in Queensland in Australia. And um, it especially jumped out at me. I've been doing a lot of research into linguistic relativity and linguistic determinism recently, due to that one class that I was talking about. And Quickstart is one of the most interesting cases that I've heard for a language, like kind of like impacting like people's like view of the world around them. In the language, everyone pretty much like constantly knows what direction they're facing. It's a very important thing in the culture to always know what direction you're facing, and it's kind of shown in every aspect of the language. Like how you greet someone else in the language is like asking like, "Oh, what way are you going?" And they'll like give like the exact direction, and they don't even have words for like say like left and right. Um, every like if they the example that I can think of is like if they like had an ant like on them, they would be like, "Oh, there's like an ant on like my northeastern leg" or something like that. Like, and it's interesting because it manifests itself in other ways too. Like, for example, when they're like plotting out like numbers on like a number line, say that will always go from east to west. So like, if they're so its direction will it's not based on their perspective, but based on like the world's perspective, I guess. I don't know. So that's a kind of cool thing. And
Yeah, I wonder if this wasn't more common in the past as well. Um, one thing that you get with Austronesian languages is the direction words for like cardinal directions is based off of monsoon winds.
oh,
And depending on where they were located, the language eventually sort of fossilized these into like a specific cardinal direction. So the word timur in Indonesian is east, but in Filipino it's timog and it's south because that's the direction that the monsoon winds came in for those, the locations of those speakers.
oh.
Um, so you sort of have like the same word, but it comes to mean strictly one direction and it means two different directions in the different languages.
That's so fascinating. Yeah, it's kind of interesting to think about because I guess logically speaking, like directions don't need to be relative to us. And yeah, I don't know. Like there are like a lot of cases in which it would probably be more useful to know like actual like I don't know. It would make sense that sometimes like that kind of information would be based on the stuff around you and like what you need to be aware of and stuff like that. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. Hmm. I'm trying to think of other examples of directions, but I don't think I know of any. But that's kind of interesting, and it kind of like I guess that like one possible repercussion of that would like you could maybe argue that like some societies have just been inherently like less self-centered maybe, or like some languages are just like inherently like less focused on the speaker as opposed to like what's like around them and what they need to deal with and stuff. So that's a kind of interesting thing to think about, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
I think it's interesting all these different ways that we have about talking and describing the world. Um, Getting back to metalinguistic awareness, it's just amazing how very few universals there actually are. Um, color terms. Some languages don't distinguish certain colors from the other one. Some distinguish more colors than we do as like basic vocab. Um, some languages have clusivity baked in to what they're talking about, whether it's including the listener or not. Um, Recently was talking with a friend um, about Hawaiian, and Hawaiian has the concept of alienable versus inalienable possession. Um, Whether you truly own it, like it's something that you can separate or not, and it just a lot of diversity out there.
There really is. And that's one of the things I love so much about linguistics and languages, just the sheer amount of diversity. That's just everywhere in like all aspects of language. Even like with the sounds that languages have. There are no sounds that are universal to every single language. There are some that are way more common than others, but there is no sound that is found in every single language. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, no. Yeah, because I'm thinking right now. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that there are no sounds that are like completely universal, and like with grammar, there's so many concepts that like aren't universal. Definitely. Yeah.
Do you happen to know what sounds are some of the most common?
Yeah. The so there are some very common nasals. I think like the M sound is incredibly common, and in and an ah or like an ah like vowel is like really really common, and like just like the schwa is also very common. So like vowels, I guess with vowels there are kind of less possible options overall, and like so with vowels they tend to be like more common. Yeah, with consonants M definitely. And I guess some alveolar sounds, like I'm pretty sure that like ta, like the T sound is like very, very common. And then
How about, so when it comes to vowels, how many vowels phonemically would you say most languages tend to have? Because as English speakers, or at least me personally, we tend to think of like a 5 vowel system as being the default. But having lived in, you know, various places like the Philippines, where actually a 3 or a 4 vowel system is pretty common, it's not always the case that a language has about 5 vowels.
yeah, it's actually kind of funny with English because we perceive most languages as having 5 vowels, but then English itself has like 17 of them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's definitely so an interesting thing with vowels in languages. Normally in languages, like the vowels are very symmetrical. So normally you'll have kind of like one that's like central and like a bit lower, and then like near the front of your mouth you'll normally have two, and near the back you'll have two, or just one on each. So 3 and 5 are very common, like very common, like amounts, like very common like vowel numbers, I guess. um I'd say that the average is probably like 4-ish, like maybe like in between those two, because I've seen many cases of there being 3 vowels and many cases of there being 5. Um, so I'd say it's probably around one of those two. It's very a lot of vowels is a pretty rare thing in languages because the vowel space isn't that large, and you can't really do too much with vowels. Like for example, like with consonants you can do a lot of things in every like position within your mouth. Like alveolar sounds can be like a ton of things. You can have like a stop, you can have like an alveolar tap, you can have like a fricative. You can do so much with your tongue that you just can't do with vowels. So normally it does tend to be a lot lower than the amount of consonants. I'd say 4 is probably a pretty good estimate.
And what about consonant sounds across languages?
Yeah, I honestly don't really know. I'd say probably low 20s to mid 20s, because that's what I've seen the most personally. But you do get ridiculous outliers. Like, for example, like the Rutokas language of Papua New Guinea, I think that the central dialect has 6
And
phonemic
Rotoka's,
consonants.
it's an Austronesian language, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
a lot of diversity in the Austronesian languages.
for sure. It is kind of interesting though, because a lot of them do tend towards having very like abnormally small consonant and even vowel inventories.
Hmm.
So that's kind of an interesting thing about the Austronesian languages. But then like you get other examples of languages that are also Austronesian that have like a ridiculous amount of like consonants and vowels. It's just beautiful how much diversity there is. Especially in the Austronesian language family, just because like everything's so spread out, like all the way
It
from
seems
like
oddly well
Americans.
studied for a non-Indo-European language family. It's, you know, it just seems very well documented. I was having a peep at some of the Afro-Asiatic languages, and they seem a lot less well documented. Once you get outside of the Semitic languages, there's just not a lot out there, you know. Uh, so it's just interesting to me how like our knowledge of human languages is actually kind of lopsided, Indo-European, very well studied. Austronesian is pretty well studied. Even obscure languages spoken by 100 people on an island somewhere are probably documented, compared to like relatively large languages spoken in parts of Africa, or our knowledge. Some languages don't have, they've not been documented very well by professional linguists, and that's actually surprising to me. Because until recently, I basically knew Austronesian and Indo-European, which are very well documented.
Yeah, it's really, I guess, just depressing to look at how understudied so many language families are. That's actually very interesting about Austronesian. I didn't realize how well studied it was, but now that you mention it, like every time that I don't know, I'm just exploring Google Maps and I like find a random island. Like I can like look at its Wikipedia page and then like all of the languages are like listed, and then you can like read you can like read more about all of them. So that is really interesting. I guess it's like a big indicator of language policy of the countries that these languages are spoken in. Which is kind of sad because most countries have had a very negative view towards their minority languages for most of history. But luckily, I'm seeing that change, and that's making me hopeful for the future. But yeah, with a lot of Afro-Asiatic languages, a lot of the countries that they're spoken in haven't really put any emphasis on those local languages. They've just really forced more standard languages, like their official ones, onto the people. For example,
unfortunately,
sorry.
A lot of them seem to be in kind of like war-torn areas.
Yeah, definitely.
Ethiopia has had like a civil war going on. Somalia is, Somalia. It's in pieces right now. It's just not I imagine that makes it kind of hard to get funding and to get people there, unfortunately.
100%. Yeah, it's really sad because those kind of languages really can't be studied until the environment surrounding them has improved. I was mainly thinking of the Berber languages, but yeah, there are a ton of, especially both Ethiopia and Somalia are very linguistically diverse, and it's sad that we can't really do any research into those languages due to the situations surrounding them.
There's actually, speaking of Somalia being diverse, I think there's a Swahili adjacent Bantu language spoken in Somalia.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that would make sense. The Bantu languages cover a pretty wide range.
It's huge. It's amazing. Being an armchair linguist, being just a hobbyist, you look at a map of Africa expecting it to be diverse, and it's actually not as diverse as you would expect, because the Bantu expansion just gobbled up all of the pre-existing languages. Like a couple thousand years ago, the Bantus expanded out from Northwest Africa, and it's pretty much Bantu languages down here, and then maybe a little bit of Afro-Asiatic and stuff up top.
Yeah, it is interesting. But also I've noticed that there's I don't know, there still is a lot of diversity within the Bantu branch. But yeah, it is kind of sad because it's just obvious, looking at a map, it's such a large area. There were so many other groups that were in that area that just don't really have anything on the map anymore, because it's just all Bantu languages all the way from Cameroon down to South Africa. It's crazy. But there is still a lot of diversity, I'd say. It just I guess kind of depends on where you look. Because for example, West Africa, especially Southwest Africa. Or yeah, the southern part of the western thing of Africa. It's very, very linguistically diverse. And a lot of different like groups
And when
are
you say
kind of
Southwest
represented there.
Africa, are you talking about like closer to Namibia, or are you talking about closer to like Nigeria?
I'm talking about like closer to Nigeria and kind of
Okay.
like west of Nigeria, but also Namibia has some very fascinating languages as well. Like all of the different like Khoisan like language families, like they're all just like so fascinating to me. Um, but yeah, there are like pockets of like extreme diversity in a lot of areas of Africa. And there are also a lot of like from a kind of more like linguistic standpoint, like Africa is like really fascinating because it's got diversity and a lot of the languages in Africa have like traits that aren't found in like any other languages or like that aren't anywhere near as common as in like any
My
other parts of the world.
my favorite part about African languages is it's got to be tone, not the fact that they have tone. It's the fact that they tend to have grammatical tone. When people think of tonal languages, people usually think of East Asian, Southeast Asian languages where there's lexical tone. Whereas you get grammatical tone where the gender of a word or the tense of a verb or something can be marked by the tone. Somali, by the way, has both lexical and grammatical tone, which is kind of neat.
Ooh. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, tone is such a cool thing. Yeah. And yeah, I don't know. It can go so much more beyond just lexical tone. I find that I've always found that really fascinating about the African languages as well.
Swahili notably does not have tone.
It doesn't. It's completely absent from Swahili, which makes it really strange because I think that out of
Most
like
Bantu
yeah,
languages do have tone.
yeah, exactly. And even just like the entire family, like the Niger Congo language family, like as a whole, I think that's like 90% of all the languages in the entire family like
Have
have
tone.
tone to some degree. Yeah.
Yeah, the only non-Bantu Niger Congo language I'm vaguely familiar with is Yoruba, which
Yeah.
definitely has tone.
Yep. Yeah, like Yoruba equal, like Wolof, uh, Bambara. Yeah, I don't know. All the ones that I can think of have tone to some degree.
You know, my brother-in-law is a native Bambara speaker.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't talk to him very often,
Oh,
but yeah, that would be interesting to learn more about.
oh, totally.
So,
Yeah.
um, before we go, I did have one more question. What caused you to settle on Arabic, doing a degree in Arabic? Because your interests are so broad. You actually started with Swahili. You started with Polish, but your main language for when I knew you roughly, when I first met you, was Swahili. 2 or 3 years ago. Uh, so, what really caused you to choose Arabic?
That's kind of a funny story. So I looked at the list of all of the languages spoken at Emory, and I initially just wanted to pick a language to fulfill my requirement. And I wanted to pick the language that I knew the least about. And that happened to be Arabic. So I was like, okay, let me take this just to fulfill like a language credit and learn some stuff about a part of the world that I don't know a lot about. And then I just kind of fell in love with it. The teachers did a great job of selling me on the language and the culture and all of that. So yeah. Um, one of the big things that caused me to pick Arabic over other ones was that pretty much the only thing that I knew about it was the tricontinental root system. And that was something that I thought was really cool and really fun to play with. So I was like, okay, maybe the language itself would be fun because this is fun. And then it was. So here I am now.
Yeah, as a learner, I do have to say one thing that stands out um, to me with Arabic is the plurals being highly irregular.
Yeah, plurals are there's almost a trade-off. Like a lot of the verbs and a lot of the patterns that you can put things into are very consistent. Then there's like a trade-off where the nouns are incredibly irregular. There are still components.
Afro-Asiatic as a whole has some weird stuff with plurals.
It
So
really
you
does.
see this with Hebrew and you see it with Somali, where for whatever reason nouns often take the opposite gender in their plural. Um, and then with Arabic, you have the famous broken plurals. You know, sort of like goose and geese, but on crack, on steroids. And yeah, they just have a weird relationship with plurals, I think.
Definitely. Yeah, and even in Berber as well. In some of the Berber languages that I've read up on, they seem to have. So in Arabic, the plurals are very, very irregular, but there are like maybe like 10 to 15 or so like general like
Patterns.
types that you can like put words into that like. So it seems inconsistent, but there are still patterns. But with the Berber languages, one of the so I the source I'm remembering this from was like a grammar on Central Atlas Tamazight specifically, and the person that wrote it was like for his like dissertation or something, and he had a section on plurals, and his conclusion was, I don't get it. There are too many patterns. There are like 40 different ones. I cannot summarize these. And they just moved on. So yeah, it's kind of fascinating how wild plurals are in Afroasiatic languages.
Yeah. Plurality is one of those things that I could deal without.
Yeah.
Filipino is one of my stronger languages, and plural marking is optional. You can do it, and there are times where it sounds more normal to do it, but you don't have to do it. Like if there's a number involved, 5 dog, you don't need the S because 5 is plural. And there are some different ways to mark plurals, at least in Filipino. You can reduplication, partial reduplication, a plural marker, things like that. Plurality is a weird one. As Indo-European speakers, we think of it as just like this base thing. But several words in English, sheep, for example, 1 sheep, 2 sheep, sounds normal. You don't have to have explicit plural marking, I think.
Yeah. A lot of times context is enough. And in a lot of languages, like the other parts of a sentence will actually like be like conjugated to kind of like match the plurality of whatever you're talking about. Yeah, it's interesting. There are like a lot of things like that. Things that we think are essential to language, like because they're so common in English. But then there's so many languages that just don't have them. Like the verb like to be, like I am, and like just like he is, like all of those, like those aren't really necessary. There are like a lot of languages that just don't have that, like Russian, for example. And then like there was the example with have earlier, where you don't really need a verb for that. Like you can express it in other ways. So
yeah, 2 Austronesian languages that come to mind, Malay and Filipino, they have like a particle that expresses existence, and it's sort of like roughly like existing at me is an object, which is, I guess, sort of similar to Russian with their construction.
Yeah, definitely.
Before we go, I also wanted to say thank you so much. I interviewed Levi recently, and he said that you were a great help making all of those free Anki decks for the community.
Oh, thank you. I love giving back to the community, and I guess that's I don't know. That's one of the I don't know. I just really love giving back to the language community because I think that language learning is like a valuable thing. I think that if you learn a language, there's so much more that comes with it. Like not just like it just makes you so much more tolerant and aware of other people and other ways of life. And I'm happy to support that in any way that I can.
Cool. And before we go, do you have any parting words for people? Maybe people interested in Arabic or doing a degree in linguistics?
I'd say go for it. Even if you don't decide to get a degree in Arabic or linguistics, intro classes are just a fun way to explore new topics. In like entry-level linguistics classes are just a lot of fun. Like you get to like play with like languages and stuff. Just have a good time, and at the end of it, you'll know whether you want. I don't know. they're just fun things to add to a schedule. I'd really recommend them, even if you aren't planning on majoring in them.
Cool. Josh, thank you so much for coming on, and you were a wonderful guest.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. This was a lot of fun.
I want to thank you for listening to this episode of the Refold Podcast. If you're watching the live premiere, you're in luck. Right as it ends, we have an after party over on the Refold Central Discord server. Come join us by using refold.link/join and chat about the episode. If you enjoyed the podcast and would like to hear more, you can find older episodes to listen to on YouTube and Spotify. Let us know what you thought about the video by liking and leaving a comment below. Do you have suggestions for upcoming visitors or requests for particular topics? Please feel free to reach out to me on Discord at GeorgePig #5413 or via email at clayton@refold.la. Thank you all for watching and or listening, and I'll see you next week.